Hello everyone and welcome back to the next episode of Outside of Life, where I chat with inspiring artists and create various art-related videos. My name is Eva and my guest today is Abigail Larson, and in this episode you will learn why research is so important in her work and what you need to do to find your art style.
So many artists I deal with, and especially the people who like my style, a lot of young artists can get confused because so many people focus on the style and forget that you have to learn the foundation first. You have to, a teacher told me once, you have to learn the rules before you can break the rules.
Abigail is a freelance mixed media illustrator working primarily with pencil, ink, watercolors, and Photoshop. Her work has been shown extensively throughout America as well as galleries in London, Paris, and Madrid. Abigail's illustrations have been featured in various publications including Spectrum Fantastic Art, Art Fundamentals, and Digital Artist, and she has worked with many publishing houses such as IDW Publishing, Titan Comics, and 3D Total. In 2016, with Universal Pictures and Desert Owl Games, she worked on a game, The Huntsman: Winter's Curse, the companion game to the Huntsman feature film. So please welcome Abigail Larson, and let's get to the interview. So welcome everyone to the next episode of Outside of Life, and I'm super happy to have Abigail here. Hi!
Hi!
So super nice that you joined us here today, and let's just start directly with the background, and maybe you can share some of your creative stories from your childhood. What was maybe like a creative outlet, like running with a kite on a meadow or drawing on walls or something which influenced you maybe in the young, early age?
Okay. Well, there was a lot. I grew up in America. I live in Italy now, but I grew up in America, and my family had a really little ranch house in Virginia. And Virginia, of course, has lots of rolling hills and forests, and our neighborhood was right smack in the middle of a really wooded area. So I spent all my time in the forest. It was really, really fun. I was mostly climbing trees and running around barefoot. And I used to pull out a blanket with me sometimes when the weather is really good, and I would just lay on a blanket and I would draw, or I just literally just daydream and think of stories and your quintessential fairy tale childhood. It was just amazing and beautiful and wonderful. So, that was my whole childhood, was just running around the woods. I read a lot of books. My parents are scientists. My dad's an archaeologist. They both studied science, but my dad became an archaeologist, and my mom went into, she was a cultural anthropologist, but went into historic textiles. She does historic interiors for museums and stuff. She's worked on the White House and a lot of presidential homes. So my upbringing was around tons of antiques, and my dad collected fossils, and just our house was full of crazy things and lots of artwork. And so I grew up with not necessarily artists, but people who appreciate art. And it was a lot. It was so much to stir my imagination. So I definitely had tons of opportunities to go to museums and look at lots of art books. My parents fed that, to me. My brother's into sports, and of course they helped him with sports, and my sister was, not so much into that stuff, but I was the one who was really into the stuff that they liked. So they definitely nurtured that, especially my dad, which was really, really fun. I remember I would go with him on some of his jobs where he was excavating, and we found whale bones and shark teeth and stuff like that. It was just cool, fun stuff. So, for a long time as a child, I wanted to be a paleontologist because I loved digging in the dirt. I just thought that was so fun. So I don't know. It was just, there was a lot of learning and a lot of imagination. A lot of just really daydreaming, and having fun with the natural world.
And so what helped you to form your kind of the goal setting that you want to be artist instead of maybe, digging up the bones?
Yeah, it's funny how it shifted. Actually, my dad got me I had lots of books on dinosaurs, of course, but he got me a book on how to draw dinosaurs, which was really cool. And I think that might have been the turning point for me. I always liked doodling. There are pictures of me as a really 2-year-old, holding pens and stuff and trying to draw. And of course, my parents, encouraged that. But when I got the How to Draw Dinosaur books, I loved it, and it turned out I was pretty good at it, for a kid. And my parents saw that, and so they would buy me art supplies. Dad would take me we had a little local art supply shop. This was, back in the early 90s, late 80s, back when there were like little mom and pop shops in Virginia. Now it's all Walmart and Target. But he got me a beautiful, huge set of colored pencils, like really nice, high quality. I don't even remember what they were, but I remember being just blown away by this. And so he would take me out and get me art supplies, and he would draw with me, and it was just like super cool. And they really pushed that, and not pushed like in the, like they forced me to do it.
Like they saw your passion.
Yes, yeah, they nurtured the passion. And when I was in high school, I had great teachers, a lot of great art teachers who also encouraged me, and I just got better. And I kept in middle school a composition notebook. Like I would just draw characters like girls, and I would draw outfits for them, and like write little stories. It was really stupid and corny, but I loved it. It was a lot of fun, and that went up through high school when I had actual training. I had some actual classical training in drawing, and a lot of that was just luck. I had a great teacher who was wonderful about the fine arts, so I learned how to like paint and how to do gesture drawings and all that kind of stuff. So I got a really good early foundation in art.
And well, how was the decision process for you, or maybe the conversation either with your parents or teachers, like what to pursue, like going for a studio job or working on your own or creating own books? And because a lot of people around maybe don't understand, and you would say like, oh, you cannot live from art, or you can be only in the galleries or doing the fine art. So kind of what helped you to kind of set this goal, like what type of art to do and how to live from it?
Well, it's funny because so many people I talk to, so many young artists say things like, my parents tell me I can't do this, or, I don't think I'm that good at it. I don't know what to do. And I had the opposite upbringing. I had parents who said, you want to be an artist? We're going to find out how you can do it. We don't know much about it, but we're going to help you find out. And I had teachers like I said, who were, I had one who went to VCU, and he recommended it for me. He said, you are really good at drawing. You should consider illustration. And I was kind of, in high school, I was sort of like, I wasn't really thinking about my career, to be honest. I was just thinking, I love drawing, and I don't know what I want to do with this. But he said, with illustration, you can tell stories with art. It doesn't have to just be gallery work. You can create images that tell stories. And it opened up, a whole new field for me. I got into, he showed me a book by Arthur Rackham, and of course I loved it. And I didn't realize, but I had seen Arthur Rackham's work before. I had a little book of Shakespeare that had Rackham illustrations in it. And so I was like, oh my God, it clicked finally when I was, I guess, in middle school and high school. I was like, oh man, I could get a job telling stories with drawing. This is such a cool idea. And it still wasn't really a big career decision for me, but it was, I knew I wanted to go to college. So he went to VCU, and I said, well, I'm going to try and get in there. And he wrote me a great recommendation letter. He was extremely supportive. I was just so fortunate to have that kind of support. And of course, my parents too were, I think they didn't voice it very much, but I'm sure they were apprehensive about oh man, art school, They never said it, but I'm sure it was I'm sure they were worried about it. But
it might be the older generation, which are now 50 plus, where it was not so common, only the fine art galleries or the other art, and now there are emerging so many different types of art, like studios are almost in every city, and so there are so many more options now as well.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. And even then, this was probably late 90s, early 2000s, and I went into college in 2006, and, there was so much changing and developing at that time. I think and then in the last 10 years, it's gone crazy. It's amazing how much the art world has developed, and especially the illustration world. Of course, with the internet being so accessible, that's a huge, huge, huge help. But when we were first starting out, it was very delicate. Social media wasn't really a thing. So I don't know. It's been an interesting transition these last 10 years. But yeah, when I first started out, it was think my parents were kind of, we're not sure how this will work, but she really loves it. So let's see where it goes. And they were just very cool about it.
So what was your first job, the first art job, you like a commission, or was it something else? If you can tell us that story.
I'm not actually sure. I don't know if I remember my very first commission. I started out on DeviantArt, so I'm sure it was probably like some DeviantArt commission. Like my first the first thing I did that really felt professional, I got into a gallery show when I was in high school, like a local, they had it at the library, and it was like this cute thing that they did for the high school students. And I was placed. I was a juried show, so I was like, oh man, people like my work. This is so cool. I think it was I did a piece for the Frog Prince. I was doing like fairy tales. I'm still, of course, still doing fairy tales, but even back then I did like a little watercolor of the Frog Prince, and that got placed in a show, and I was just like, oh, so cool. So that was like my first step.
Yeah. And so what helped you develop your skills the most? If you think about it, like maybe there was some advice along the way, like, I don't know, going for the live drawing classes, or like, as you mentioned, the telling stories. If you can give us like maybe specific example, maybe one or more if you want.
Yeah. Well, my first, like, I had some of my drawing classes, one of the things that really stands out to me when I learned how to do gesture drawings and learning anatomy, that was like a really huge key to me, because before then I'd been drawing like, cartoony stuff. And so it was a huge thing to like step into fine arts and really learn, perspective and color theory, and especially anatomy for me, because I draw so many figures. So that was a really big deal.
Yeah, because when you practice the anatomy, you draw basically realistic, but then your artworks are really stylized and still like cartoony, or how to call the illustration. But you know that behind the whole illustration there is a skeleton and there are the muscles, and this is how to simplify the lines, right?
Yes, and that was a big challenge, especially I think so many artists I deal with, and especially the people who like my style. A lot of young artists can get confused because so many people focus on the style and forget that you have to learn the foundation first. You have to, a teacher told me once, you have to learn the rules before you can break the rules. And I always remember that, it's okay to have like weird perspective. If you look at my pieces, I don't draw straight lines, nothing is totally perfect, but I spent years mastering how to draw perspective. We had in college, I had a professor who made us draw. He would make us sit for hours in the hallway, and we had to draw the hallway. But of course, it was a big industrial building, so there's like pipes and stuff. It was the worst. I hate drawing architecture. But, after years of doing that and practicing, I can do it without being overwhelmed by trying to draw an interior. I can tackle that easily because I had so much practice in doing that. It's essential. And with learning figures, you have to understand the skeleton. You have to understand muscle structure. You can't just like wing it and really make it look believable, if that makes sense.
Exactly, because as you mentioned, to know the rules before to break them as well. I don't know, Picasso, for example, right? And he was super good at realistic drawings when he was 15, I think. And and then he
understood. He understood the form, and he understood shadow and shape and color. And all of these things are incredibly important. I took color theory, which opened, my eyes, because before then my stuff was just I was just like a free for all. And I did a lot of monochromatic stuff because I didn't really understand color theory until I was pushed into learning it. And it really helps. And even now, I do some monochromatic pieces and things like that. And but understanding tone and shadow helps that to make your pieces stand out. And understanding complementary colors, secondary colors, all those, they seem like basics to a lot of professional artists. But if you're learning or confused by it, it's a huge help.
Yeah, because also when you just start thinking about it and then you go outside and just try to observe, that helps so much. So just to have it in the back of your mind. And maybe you can mention as well, what are your maybe the biggest steps in your artistic process if you're starting a new project or new art piece, how do you do your research? Do you do thumbnails? Maybe do you set up the color palette? Or maybe you can mention some of your,
Sure. The first thing I do with most of my projects, what I do now, I do a huge variety of things. I do some design work. I do children's books. I do game design. All of that stuff starts with research for me. I have to get inspired by something before I can start, even when I have a time crunch. I work with a lot of tight deadlines, but still, if I can just Google something or get on Pinterest and look for some, a lot of my things are period pieces. So I'll look up historical costumes. I might see a silhouette of a dress that I really like, or I'll look up some artwork from that time period and see if there's something that sort of stirs my imagination. But it all starts with research. It's essential for me to kind of immerse myself in what it is that I'm working on. That's the first thing. And then, of course, thumbnails come next. That's just sort of standard. Every client, needs some previews. So thumbnails are next. And I'll usually do 5 or 6 of those. And, I'll try just several different poses. A lot of times, I'll model myself, or I'll look online for artist references. There are some websites that have models who stand in different poses where you can look at them, and or I'll just stand myself and do it. So thumbnails are next. I have to wait for approval on those. Then of course there's always redos, and they need things fixed, and then it goes into final lines and colors, and that part of the process ends up going pretty quickly. But it's most time consuming to do the research and to sit there and sketch, and you just get the right composition.
Yeah, and then when you mentioned the research, how do you do the research exactly? Do you maybe search for maybe 3 or 4 icons, you put maybe on your mood board, or maybe research for the hair of the character, and you mentioned costumes. So do you try to combine these kind of mood boards, or just really randomly?
It depends, honestly. It changes from project to project, and depending on how much time I have. My big project right now, I was hired by Llewellyn to do a tarot deck. So that's a huge project, 78 cards, and it's going to take me over a year to do it. And so I have a lot of time, so I can sit down and I get on Pinterest, and I set, for almost all of my big projects, I just make its own board, and I'll scroll through things. I'll just Google search, or Google is just such a huge tool for me, honestly. When I'm researching things, I spend a lot of time researching. If I'm not sure if I know the time period of the piece, I will go and I will look on Wikipedia. I will find out about every article of clothing and every kind of hairstyle. I get really into it. I research as much as I can, because it's kind of fascinating to me how people used to live, which is why I love period work so much. So all of that stuff, I'll then go look it up. And if I see great images, and sometimes I'll see images that have the right mood, or a color scheme that I like, or something like a composition that I really like, or I think is successful, I'll save all of that stuff and put it into a Pinterest board. And then I can scroll through it later and pick out things. And so I kind of draw little bits from all of that to get to my piece.
Yeah, also, as you mentioned, atmosphere or color or whatever it is.
Sometimes you run across it, and often I'll run across things for other projects, and I'll save that for other things. But the inspiration will hit you randomly, almost, it seems.
Yeah, and when you do thumbnails, as you mentioned, you do also the poses and the composition. Do you do also different thumbnails just to explore the color, or that's part of that?
That's sometimes I do. Some clients ask for that specifically. Normally, once I do the line work, I'll put it in Photoshop, and then I'll do several different layers and try different colors when the line work is done. Usually, the farthest I'll get with thumbnails is tones. I'll do blacks and whites to see which characters need to come out and which things in the background need to be pushed back, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But color usually comes later for me. And I know lots of artists do, of course, color thumbnails, and some clients prefer to have color options ahead of time, which then, of course, I'll do. Usually that's later for me.
Yeah, so you prefer to work with the value tones, right? The simple value structure. Yeah, because for example, I prefer to work with the color and the kind of the feeling what I had already from the color thumbnail. Yeah. So that's really interesting to see.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned that you have the tight deadline, so how do you kind of schedule your day, or how do you plan your week? How do you limit yourself? Okay, I have maybe 1 day to do the research, or I have 1 hour, or how do you prioritize the projects and stuff?
It depends. If the project has a really strict deadline, then the research, of course, takes, sort of a backseat, and I just limit myself to, a few minutes or an hour or something like that. It changes every day, and with every project, I have no structure at all. It's a complete free for all because I like to sort of tinker around with things. Like I'll do a lot of doodles and sketches and just sort of wait for something to fall into place. If I have the time to do that, that's my favorite way to work. Is just sort of get it on paper and, just play with it until it feels right. So it's very loose, how I work. But I've had projects when I worked with Universal on the Huntsman video game and Desert Owl Games. When I did that, that was, I mean, I had a seriously tight deadline. Everything had to be in very quickly. And I was lucky to have a really good team who helped me. They had people who helped me color, and they helped with doing the backgrounds. And so it ended up going very quickly, but that one was a real challenge for me because there were tons of characters. I mean, animals and creatures, and that was a big, big, big project. And a lot of it we didn't even end up using. So it was just like, oh my gosh, it was mind blowing how much work it was. But that one, I would get up early in the morning. I would start sketching because at night they would be emailing me because they were in California, and so I would get emails in the morning. I'd have to see everything I had to fix, and then we all did a big team check-in meeting through Slack, and I was just like, oh my God, it was so much work, but it was so much fun, and I learned so much. And that big project was that was in 2016, I think. And that was one that really taught me time management because it was so nice to have a structure and have to have meetings, it was really interesting. So that helped me to sort of plan my day, start off sketching, only limit myself to 1-2 hours and then move on to this other thing. And then later I would have finished line work and that's when I would start coloring, and that's all on the computer. So it was nice to structure myself that way.
Yeah, because now you use Photoshop, I guess, or some other tools as well. You cannot live without.
Just Photoshop. That's my big main tool. Behind me, you'll see I've got a little drawing table, a drafting table, and I use a light tablet for transferring sketches. I work traditionally in the first stage. I'll draw and sketch on paper, take those sketches, and then transfer them onto watercolor paper and do inks on top of that with the light behind it so I can see it. And then I'll watercolor it, scan it, and then all the coloring is done in Photoshop.
Oh, yeah, because then you kind of combine all of the traditional and digital. So why do you prefer the traditional compared to maybe just sketching directly digital? Because of course, that's faster, but then the textures maybe.
Yeah, to me, it's the texture, but also I've bought every kind of tool for for trying digital drawing. I really have tried. I've gotten tablets and all kinds of stuff. It is just, to me, it doesn't feel right. If that makes sense. Drawing on paper feels better to me. I like the way the ink on paper looks. I know, people have told me there's brushes you can download that you can get it. It does, to me, just does not seem the same. Maybe eventually I'll try it again and see if I can try it, but because I feel like it would save a lot of time and it'd probably be easier for me to do it all digital. But just for now, I love the way paper feels. I love the way ink looks, and of course sketching on paper. There's just nothing like it. So yeah.
Before we continue, let's take a little break because many of you have been asking me about recommendations for different tools and resources to help you out with many different things like studying, finding inspiration, overcoming artistic block, managing your time, and freelance. So I decided from now on in the episodes I will share with you some of my favorite things which help me a lot, and I'm sure they can help you out too. So let's go take a look. So the first one is Audible, which is the largest audiobook store out there with more than 100,000 audiobooks. And I love listening to stories and learning from books, and even if you are not a book reader, this is a great way to get the knowledge and advice from books just by listening. It would be a shame to miss out on all the great tips if you just don't like to read. I usually listen to audiobooks while I'm traveling, doing housework, or painting. It's very relaxing and I learn a lot. What is awesome, you can get free 30 days trial, which is like getting free books. So try it out for yourself and go to artsideoflife.com/audible. The next one is for all the freelancers and studio owners out there. It's called FreshBooks, and it's an invoice and accounting software that is super easy to use and significantly cuts your time needed for invoicing, getting paid, tracking expense, time tracking, and making proposals. Great part about this is that with few clicks you can export all important data for your tax declaration too. And you can get a free trial 30 days to test it out for yourself too. So go to artsideoflife.com/freshbooks. The last one is trusted house sitters, and as you maybe already know, I love traveling to refresh my inspiration and avoid art blocks, but my budget doesn't allow it so often. Fortunately, I discovered Trusted House Sitters website, where you can do the pet sitting and live for free like a local. I love dogs and cats and all kinds of animals, so it's great win-win. In this way, it's only about buying a flight ticket or travel there by car. Accommodation is for free and you can have great fun with animals, and you can also draw them and practice your animal anatomy skills. It also works for those of you who have pets and are looking for pet sitters to be able to travel. So check it out at artsideoflife.com/THS. You will find more artistic resources, tips, and tools used by me or mentioned in the interviews at artsideoflife.com/resources. So go check it out. And just to let you know, some of the links are affiliate links, which means I will get paid a small commission if you decide to purchase through them, but at absolutely no added cost to you. And in this way, you get a chance to support Artside of Life, which I really appreciate. And now let's go back to the interview. And do you carry around like a sketchbook with you all the time, maybe when you go to cafes, or do you go like to draw outside?
I really hate drawing around people. I feel like, every time I try it, someone always comes over to my table and wants to see what I'm doing, and
That's true.
It drives me crazy. I'm not incredibly social, so I'm not great about that. But in college we used to do that. I had groups of friends. We were in art school, so groups of us would go out and we'd do like plein air painting, and that was always so much fun. I took oil painting. We did like oil painting outside, and that was like. It was just super cool. But these days, no, I am in my studio. I am, pretty much drawn to my table and stuck there for hours and hours. I do keep a little sketchbook for when I travel, and that's usually just in case I have, because I've got a bunch of clients, and sometimes people say, oh, could you just fix this one thing? And so I'll have to like get on the sketch, on the sketch pad, and I'll be working on the train. I've definitely done a few paintings on trains before, which is fun.
And if someone is kind of just starting to work with clients, what would you advise? Maybe charging wise, do you charge per hour, per project, or per day, or what is the best from your experience?
Well, there's a lot of debate about this right now. Actually, there's some great articles going around about what illustrators in particular should be doing, because there's been a lot of confusion over the years about the worth of illustrators, which is pretty. It can be. A little discouraging for young artists, because it seems like it's just so hard to get ahead as an illustrator. It's a very competitive field, and it's very confusing. You don't always know what to charge people. But I started off doing like $20 commissions on DeviantArt. I was pretty young and I didn't understand, but I felt like, a little drawing might take me an hour or so I don't really know. So what my mom ended up telling me, she ran her own business for a while doing decorating, and she charged per hour. And when she started out, so I thought, I don't know, maybe like 50 an hour would be right. And my dad in particular was always like, don't undersell yourself. You should charge more. And he still says that, even though I'm making pretty good money now. But my dad was always like the hard ass about it, like, you have to charge so much money. And so I did. I started charging like 20 or 50 an hour, and then that got to be, when I started getting bigger projects, it got to be way too confusing to keep track of all that stuff. So I have flat rates now, which is usually like quarter page illustration, half page illustration, full page, dust jacket, that kind of thing. So it'll go from like, 150, 250. It goes up from there, 300, whatever, depending on the project.
Exactly.
So it changes.
Yeah, because it also, like, if we think about like how much value we actually bring to the client, if or maybe do you ask as well how the illustration is used, like if they sell, I don't know, like merchandise, or because like how much revenue it will actually bring them in the long run.
Oh yeah, there's licensing. I mean, there's so much now. Like, I've learned so much along the way. But starting out, it can be daunting. It's hard to know the value of your work when it's being used not just for a book, but also like merchandise, like you said. I mean, sometimes there's resale, and I've worked with museums where I've had stuff on consignment. Like I've had things where they've just done limited editions. There's like all these things you need to consider when you're doing it. And I actually have an agent now who helps me with this stuff. So when I get bigger projects like books, like doing a fully illustrated book, the contracts for those can be very overwhelming. You're just like, oh my God, this much money, this is amazing. But you do need someone to like reel you in and, help you make sure that you're getting enough with royalties. And I mean, all this, there's just so much that is involved with it. And then of course, negotiating prices, where I would start off, where I would get a contract and be like, oh my gosh, $1,000, this is amazing. And I'm now looking back, I talked to my agent about it, and she just laughs. She's just like, oh my God, you realize you could have been paid so much more for this. But when you're starting, when you're doing it yourself, you don't really know, the value. And I went freelance pretty early. I mean, if there's one thing I could change about the way that I have sort of run my business, I guess you could say, if I could change one thing, I would have slowed down. I jumped right in. When I was still in college, I was really anxious to get started. I wanted to be an illustrator after college. So like I set up my website, I had postcards, I had a client list, like people I wanted to work with. And it was, of course, Simon & Schuster, like huge, like impossible clients. But I made lists, and I had contacts. I was like, I'm going to do this. But of course, I got rejected from everything because my work just wasn't, it was college student work. I was not where I needed to be. So I wish I had slowed down a little bit and like taken some time off and just worked on my portfolio, but I was just too anxious. So looking at my portfolio from college, I'm just like, oh, what was I thinking? But yeah.
So if you are like maybe applying for working with the client, does that still happen? Like you're networking, or they always come to you now at this stage?
Now, fortunately, these last, knock on wood, these last 3 or 4 years or so, I've been very, very fortunate to have my work come to me, which still blows my mind. I think that's just so crazy. But I got lucky, and it's a lot of online networking and pestering people. I've definitely pushed my portfolio, and my agent, of course, helps a lot. She has my work, of course, on hand, and she helps me with getting jobs. And so I do still reach out to galleries, and I do still reach out to publishers, and I've gotten some work that way as well. But the bulk of my work is coming to me now, which is really cool.
Perfect. And how did you find the agent which like you are happy with and fits with your goals and everything?
Yeah, that was sort of crazy how that happened. The first agent I worked with, I'm with the same agency, Red Sofa, but the first agent I worked with, she just was a fan. She liked my work, and so she approached me and said, we have this small agency, we really love your work. I think we can represent you. And so I signed on with them, and it ended up being really, really great. Now they're a literary agency, so like it's not really like an art agent, which is it's a different thing. Usually for gallery artists. But they helped me so much with finding and talking to potential clients. They get, an agency will get your pitch and your manuscript into the right hands, whereas almost all publishers, they do not take unsolicited manuscripts. So it helps to have an agency help you out in that regard. So they found me, actually.
And this agency is like in your area where you live, or they are like from different country?
This agency is from America, but they work with artists like me all over the world. So they're very, very flexible. But yeah, they're American based.
Ah, nice. And so when you mentioned you are in Italy, why are you in Italy?
I abandoned America.
So is
Yeah,
it,
to be
yeah.
honest.
Is it like
My
a travel or you work from Italy or?
I live here. My husband is Italian.
Okay.
He was born and raised here, but then he came to America and we met and fell in love and got married, and we spent 4 years together there. And we would come back to Italy to visit his family and stuff. And every time we came here, I was just like, oh my God, do we have to leave? I love it here. Do we really have to go back to America? And we seriously talked about it. We had a house in Richmond, and after a year of that, we were kind of like, we could probably make it work in Italy. We could probably do it. And so we did. I sold everything, and my husband had a green card for America, but we ended up just coming right back to Italy, and we got an apartment here, and we've settled in. It's been a year now, so it's a little culture shock for me, and this is a new city. We're in Turin, so it's different, but it's what I've really wanted. And I grew up in America, of course, and I love it, but and Virginia is so beautiful, but after a while, I was just kind of thinking, I think I would be happier in Europe. I came here and I felt like I was already at home, and we traveled here regularly, and we've gone, to a few other places, and Italy really struck a chord with me. So we decided we would move here, and it's been really wonderful.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And how is your Italian?
It's terrible.
But yeah, you can go around and be there.
I can do a little bit, but I'm still learning. I really want to enroll in a class here because I really want to be like super fluent. My husband helps a little bit, but it's a slow process.
Oh, perfect. And when you mentioned that you have a studio, do you have to travel to the studio, or it's kind of like attached to your apartment?
It's in my apartment. Yep. I have this area is my studio. It's a big 17-foot long room. It's just a big open space. We just moved in literally in January, or early January, late December, and so it's been a little bit of a process to get it situated. It's a bigger space than I'm used to. I always work at home. I don't like to have to go out and go somewhere else or pay rent on another building. But this is my workspace, and it's got a little balcony and big windows. So I love it.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, because then it's also good that it's not like your bedroom or living room, because you still have like a separate space where it feels like, okay, now I'm working and now I'm relaxing.
Exactly. It's really important to not have it too close to the home area.
And how much time do you spend maybe working? Do you take weekends off, or do you work usually at night? Are you like a night owl, or when are you the most productive?
Early morning and late at night. During the day, there's a lot of stuff we have to take care of usually. There's just regular errands, life stuff. Yeah, like right now, actually, I have to run to the post office. I have to send artwork to a gallery. There's always something that needs to get done, and of course there's just regular things like groceries and whatever. In Italy, everybody takes the middle of the day off, so
closed from 2 to 7. In some areas,
Oh my gosh, it can be so crazy. But so I have to block out times during the morning and afternoon to run out and do things. But middle of the day, everything is very quiet. Usually, I take some time up in the middle of the day, and but I'm usually up till 2 a.m. For some reason, even if I get up really early, early morning is when I'll do my focus stuff, if I have to write something, if I have to answer interview questions or answer emails, and I really need to focus, I do that stuff in the morning, and I'll do a lot of research in the morning. But it's nighttime is when I really relax, and it's just when I can sort of get in the zone of drawing. And for some reason, it's just the nighttime works better for that for me.
Yeah, oh, really nice. And when you also talked about the client work, so what do you live from mainly? Is it the client work or the illustration for the books? You also sell your own prints, so maybe which one is the biggest chunk for you, or how do you combine your income streams?
It's all of it pretty pretty equally. I do pretty good regular sales from my print shop, which is great because they sell worldwide, and they take, it's Society 6. They take care of all the, printing and shipping for me, so I don't have to worry about any of that. That's a huge chunk of my income. And then the freelance work, which is all the contract work and private commissions, all of that stuff. That's the other really big chunk. But yeah, that's
perfect.
it.
Nice. Yeah, because it's always nice to see how people combine it. Like, do you use Patreon, or you sell art prints, or whatever it is, right?
Yep, I'm on Patreon as well, and I have like 30, I think, Patreons. It's not a big thing. I'm really bad about remembering to advertise it, but I do have a little bit of income from that as well, which is great. So it comes in from a few different sources, but mostly it's the freelance and the print sales. Those are my big income.
Oh, cool. So now people can go check out your Patreon, so we can just plug it in.
Please do.
Perfect. And if we think about also like along the way, the whole art career, what would you consider the most difficult time? Because that's usually the time where we learn the most, or maybe if you can share, like, what would be the takeaway kind of from this time?
Most difficult times, usually, I mean, and I think this is true for pretty much anyone, is whenever there's personal things that come up. Like our move to Italy was huge for me. And of course it was for Davide as well. But it was exhausting. We sold everything that we owned in America. We couldn't bring any furniture, so we just, whatever we could carry in like 6 suitcases. And the flight was really long. And then there's the physical moving. When we first moved to Italy, it was we were staying near where his mother lives, which is, we're in the north, and it was Albenga is the name of the city, but she lived in Ortevero, and we moved to Ronzo, which is a little tiny medieval mountain village. And we moved there just because it was convenient. It was, when we got to Albenga, we would get on the bus and have to bus up the mountain to our little apartment. And it was an adventure for a while. It was like getting used to this culture. And in little mountain villages in Italy, it's a bunch of, it's elderly people, and none of them speak English. And
exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. It was really fascinating to me, and a big learning experience. So that was like, just getting used to life in Italy it was wonderful and exciting, but I could not create. I found it very hard for probably the whole first month we were here. I had to like order desks and tables and like things to work on, like all of this stuff. I had my beautiful iMac from America that I had my computer, and and that was it. I just found it so hard I had no real studio. I had a spare bedroom in the apartment we were in, and I just sort of set things up there, but there was no window, and it was just sort of small and dark, and I had such a hard time with that. And it's not like it was a devastating thing, but it did stifle my creativity for a long time, and I had trouble with that. But of course, anytime I go through, like when I was younger, I guess in my early 20s, I had a bad breakup, and that really, shook me up, and I had a hard time. That was just an awful time in my life. Immediately after that, I got into a car crash.
Oh no.
And it was awful. Like, it was like every bad thing that could happen happened at once during that time. Again, that slowed me down a lot. But after a while, you just start to slowly get back into work and finding that creative spark again. And it does eventually come back, but it took a while. And of course, whenever the hard times come, it's usually just life, birth, stuff that happens.
Yeah, so the takeaway from it would be that it just passed, you have to go through it, and then you just accept that like, okay, maybe the creativity is not there right now, but it will come back.
And I always knew that because, throughout your life, you, as creators, everyone knows it never goes away completely. It might feel like it's gone for a while, but it always does come back. And how I deal with that really is just, I try to stay inspired and sometimes it feels like, oh my gosh, how can you say that? Stay inspired. It's impossible. But, sometimes it's just watching movies. I would watch a really beautiful movie or listen to music. I would find a new artist to listen to. I would go to a museum. There were like always galleries to go to and events. It could come from anywhere. It could just come from a walk in the woods. Traveling helps me a lot if I go to a new place and get lost. I kind of enjoy that adventure, and it could be anything like that to spark the creativity. Yeah.
And do you have maybe like advice to young self, something you wish you knew before you started the art career?
I would tell, any young artist, I would tell myself if I could go back, just be patient. Stop trying to rush it. Don't rush into it. And it can be, especially, I don't know how young artists do it these days with like Instagram and seeing like constant, amazing artists doing great things. And it must be so overwhelming. I'm kind of glad that I didn't have that when I was starting out. We had LiveJournal and MySpace, and that's it. Like, it wasn't too overwhelming. Like, I would go to bookstores and see other illustrators and be like, oh man, but everyone wants to like publish their artwork and be the next great artist. And I feel like if you just slow down and take your time, learn the craft, experiment and explore, and don't worry about having an amazing style. Don't worry about being the best draftsman. Don't worry about how well you paint. Focus on creating and finding joy in creating and drawing the things you love, not what you think people will love, but what you really enjoy. Yeah. Take your time and have patience, and the rest will come.
Definitely. And what helped you also with the telling is the stories in your artworks, right? Do you write like notes, when you had the idea for a story or?
Yeah, it's terrible. Actually, I've gotten so distracted recently in the past 2 years. I started writing and I'm really interested in fairy tales. So I've been like rewriting my own fairy tales and I'll come up with like, this is just a way to keep me sane, to be honest, because there's so much work that I have to do and a lot of it's very demanding and there's a lot of pressure. And sometimes it's not even like I take a break from drawing. I'll keep drawing to take a break, but I'll be drawing my own things, exploring my own fairy tales and having fun with my own characters and, developing their world. Yeah. And so I've gotten into that a lot.
Oh, perfect. And so what about like the future? What is your dream scenario? Like what would you like to be working on in like 5 to 10 years? And it's like, okay, this is how it will be for me.
Well, one of the things that's kind of crazy for me now is that, for example, like right now I'm working on this tarot deck. And years ago, when I was in college, working with Llewellyn, they were on my list. I love that publisher and I always wanted to work with them. And I always thought, oh my God, it'd be so cool to do a tarot deck. And now here I am. It was so amazing. And they contacted me. Yeah, they contacted me out of the blue. It was like a complete surprise. It was just like, I don't know, everything lined up perfectly and it just happened. Of course, I'm almost 30 now and it took me a long time to get here. But so for example, like it does happen. When I was asked when I was younger, how do you see yourself in 10 years? I'm there and I'm doing what I wanted to do, which is an incredible thing, I think. And I'm really, really lucky and I'm so happy to be where I am now. But from here in the next 10 years, I think I would love to see myself writing and illustrating my own books for, bigger publishers. I'd love to see my fairy tales, take form. I was thinking more like graphic novels or something, or like fully illustrated books, especially young adult. I've done a lot of kids stuff. I've done some children's books, but I'd love to get into young adult and graphic novels. So maybe in the next 10 years, we'll see something like that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see them. I'm sure it will be great.
It'd be awesome. I would love that.
Yeah, and one of my last questions is like, what would you like to be remembered for, in like 100 years, like super far in the future?
Oh my gosh. If anyone was going to remember me. I don't know. Not one thing in particular, really. I hope that I have a lot of artists, young artists who have contacted me now who say that my work inspires them and that they've seen my work on DeviantArt years ago and they still follow me. Like I would, and that's just a few years back, but I would hope that in many years to come that my artwork, whichever pieces they are, still can inspire people. It still can make people feel, a little touch of darkness and romance or something, something nostalgic. I hope that my artwork will continue to do that for future generations.
Yeah, just bringing some emotion from the artwork. So
Yeah, yeah,
definitely.
or seeing the picture and telling their own story for it. I love that about some of the things that I do. That some of my pieces, people will say, I looked at this immediately and already came up with a story for it. I think that's so cool that, an illustration can do that for someone. I hope that continues.
Yeah, I totally agree because yeah, that's something which it can bring creativity in someone, right?
Yeah,
So that's
right.
perfect.
And I think that's amazing. I feel like there's so many people who say, oh, I don't have a creative bone in my body, or oh, yeah, I can't draw, I can't, I don't. Everyone's creative. Everyone has their own brand of creativity. So, if it makes you feel something or think of a story,
Yeah.
then that's wonderful. I think it's really important.
Exactly, yeah. And so before we say goodbye, maybe you can share like last piece of advice or key takeaway, and then we will slowly finish.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just very important that one of the questions I always get from people is they say your style is so unique. It's so interesting. How did you do it? And I always tell people, especially the very young artists, I did it by accident. I didn't mean to draw like this. It was something, like we said earlier. I learned the fundamentals of fine art. I started off drawing realistically. My first drawings were like with actual shading and like proper proportions. Like my early stuff looked like normal, regular fine art. I developed a style after studying lots of artists. Like I looked at so many artists, Harry Clark, Aubrey Beardsley, of course, Arthur Rackham, Edmund Dulac, all those people. I studied lots and lots of artists and illustrators. And eventually I started to find I like to draw chairs this way. I like to shade this way. I like this kind of hatching. And it was totally by accident. And you wake up one day years later and you're like, oh, I have a style now. So I would tell people, it is not so important that you focus on finding a style. It is important for an artist to have a style. It's important to be unique and to stand out, but you should focus more on just creating, on trying lots of different things, try lots of different styles if you're not sure, study lots of artists, and the style will come, eventually.
Definitely, yeah, I totally agree, and that's a really great advice to finish this conversation. So
Great.
thank you so much again for being here. It was so
Well,
great.
thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. It's great talking to you.
Thank you so much. Definitely my pleasure, and thanks everyone who joined also today. And I hope you are inspired and go continue creating something. So see you in the next episode, and thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe because I post new videos every week. I will be also super happy if you let me know your thoughts in comments and give the video a thumbs up. You can find all the resources mentioned in this episode at artsideoflife.com. Just type a guest name in the search bar. There is also a couple of free artist resources ready for you. So if you want to listen to the interviews on the go too, make sure to check out the podcast at artsideoflife.com/podcast. Continue to inspire each other, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye!